afternoon. Welcome to the Information Technology and General Services Committee for Tuesday, March 27, 2018. I want to go ahead and call the general public. I know we have one general public speaker card, so if we can go ahead and take that. Is there a Waukesha here? Waukesha? I guess not. So speaker's not here. So with that, we will go ahead and close general public comment. We didn't have any other speaker cards?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so we will go ahead, and I'd like to request, colleagues, items 3 through 6 on consent, unless there's any objections.
No objections here.
Push on 3.
On 3, okay. So we'll do 4 through 6 on consent, and seeing no objections, those items will be approved. And we will let's go ahead and call. Let's go ahead and take item number 3. Okay. So, Mr. Clerk. Mm-hmm.
Good afternoon, John White, City Clerk. Item 3, CA report relative to amending the ITA contract with Jive Communications Incorporated, extending the term for 1 year through June 30, 2018, for telecommunications services for the Los Angeles Public Library.
Good afternoon, Trina Unziker with the Office of the CAO. Our office is recommending approval for ITA to execute an amendment to their contract with Jive Communications. That's going to be for telecommunications services for the LA Public Library. ITA would like to extend the term of the contract an additional 1 year for a total of a 4-year total agreement. No additional funds are being requested as the engagement is complete and ITA is finalizing payment of services.
Mr. Blumenfeld.
Just real quick, so is this enough time to complete that work?
My understanding is that the work is complete.
Okay. And then the phones that were converted from POTS to VoIP as part of the contract, how does the cost compare to the city's cost to do similar work?
Good afternoon, Laura Ito with Information Technology Agency. We are using the same provider for the LA Library VoIP conversion as we are proposing for the rest of the city's VoIP implementation.
Right. So the clarification would be that the work at the LA Public Libraries is complete.
Okay. Great. That's it. Thank you.
No questions.
No questions. Okay. Seeing that being satisfied, we will go ahead and adopt that item, and which will take us to item number 1.
Item 1, ITA report relative to the status of the mobile worker pilot program from desk phones to smartphones, recommendations, and additional implementations.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Honorable Council members, starting in 2013, U.S. phone companies with FCC support announced the termination of traditional phone lines by 2020. Once the mainstay of communications, POTS, or plain old telephone systems, lines, have seen a massive reduction in subscribers over the last 20 years due to the tremendous popularity of cellular phones and voice over IP, or voice over internet protocol phones. As the Honorable Council members have noticed, the way people communicate over the last 10 years has changed dramatically also. Today, over half of all American households no longer have a landline. And over 80% of American adults own a smartphone, according to Pew Research. In fact, the average city employee only makes or receives 3 calls per day on their desk phone, favoring other communication methods such as email, chat, text, etc. As a result, traditional phone lines, like these phones right here, are no longer sustainable for phone companies. They have to maintain an aging network with dwindling subscribers, hence their elimination by 2020. Unfortunately, this means the city has to replace 30,000 aging phone lines. Although fortunately, our outdated, failing PBX phone systems are long overdue for replacement, and the modern technology has provided us excellent alternatives. Over the last several years, the ITA has researched and experimented with various replacement options, ranging from soft phones, which would be a headset wired directly into your computer, to voice over IP desk phones that run across the city network, to cellular smartphones. After careful analysis of city department needs and a 2017 pilot funded by council, which went across 464 city staff and ITA, LAPD, and the mayor's office, the ITA has determined that the use of smartphones to replace traditional desk phones for the majority of the city's civilian workforce is really the most beneficial option. We call this option the Mobile Worker Program, because that's a lot sexier than phone replacement program. Simply put, the Mobile Worker Program is a replacement of traditional single-purpose desk phones with multi-purpose smartphones, and a limited number of voice-over IP desk phones for those jobs that require stationary phones, such as LAPD stations, libraries, receptionists, or call centers. Based on the research, surveys of other city agencies, and the pilot program, we've identified numerous benefits to the Mobile Worker Program. First of all, it gives city employees more ways to communicate. They can call, but they can also text, email, chat, or do video streaming. Easy access to information when staff need it, where they need it. Improved emergency communications and disaster recovery, and mobile access to city applications and systems, truly a digital worker. It's also better for the city of Los Angeles. It saves taxpayer money. It costs $6 to $7 million less to implement this mobile worker program using smartphones than it would be for the voice over IP desk phones, as well as 13% less per line per month. So it has ongoing savings compared to the VoIP approach. It reduces tremendous strain on the city's data network. Remember, a cellular phone runs on a cellular network versus a VoIP phone, which has to run on the city network, which has to be augmented and built out to handle that level of traffic. It improves cybersecurity. Many of us use what we call two-factor authentication. If someone tries to hack into your email account, you'll receive a notification on your phone, so someone would have to have your phone and hack into your account to be able to get in. It eliminates department costs and delays from add moves and changes. Departments often wait months to simply get a phone moved from one cubicle to the next or a line moved. It would eliminate that. And it helps the recruitment of a younger workforce. In the ITA, over half of our staff were eligible for retirement last year. And as new workers come in, these are the types of things that they aren't familiar with at home and they're not familiar with when they come to a job.
Wild.
Right? It is wild, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's that expression, digital natives and digital immigrants. We're digital immigrants. We remember a time before the internet very clearly. We have all sorts of people who do not know that time. It's not something that they can reference.
I remember GroupWise.
That's right. You are too young, ma'am, if that's all you remember going back. I remember a lot older things.
Oh, yeah.
The ITA identified a number of considerations to this approach. First of all, cellular coverage to do this must be ubiquitous and reliable. Absolutely. As reliable as traditional phones today. The ITA worked with GSD to perform a competitive process to identify the best provider based on coverage, price, phone options, and in-building augmentation, which is an important one when we have tall buildings. Based on the responses from cellular providers, T-Mobile was selected in part due to their commitment to provide free in-building coverage. Based on our pilot project, we augmented 15 floors across large and small buildings. We're confident that coverage will be ubiquitous and reliable. Second, the replacement of 30,000 phone lines by 2020 requires timely department assistance. To ensure a smooth transition, departments must help the ITA. Fortunately, we have a good relationship with departments, but they must help us with facility floor plans and phone allocations to make sure that the receptionists, the call centers, and others are easily identified and they get the proper type of phone. The ITA has developed a 5-point department engagement plan, and we refined it over the course of this pilot. Continued support from, of course, Mayor's Office and Council is essential for us to meet this critical timeline. Third, a replacement of desk phones with smartphones is a cultural change. Much like the introduction of personal computers, which you don't remember because you're just in the GroupWise side, and copier machines into the workplace, this will be a change for staff, and we respect that. There is little more personal than changing something that's physically on your desk. While most employees are very familiar with smartphones, the number is 80% in America own one. I'm sure in the city of Los Angeles that's actually a much higher number. We have developed on-site assistance, online resources, clear policies, and will work very closely with city employees and departments during this change. This proposal has been heard and supported by the IT Oversight Committee comprised of the Mayor's Office, CAO, and CLA. Pursuant to their feedback, we've had subsequent meetings with City Attorney, CAO Employer Relations, and personnel to review the overall mobile worker approach and to ensure proper policies and communications are in place for overtime, acceptable use, California Public Records Act, and other topics. As such, we have the following recommendations. Number one, that Council direct ITA to continue the mobile worker program pilot using T-Mobile service with other city departments, and we have a list of buildings there, until all the funds are expended. that the council direct general services to work with ITA and T-Mobile to execute the necessary building access agreements. Of course, we need to get into buildings and ensure there's coverage before we start the implementation. And number 3, that the council direct city departments to designate a mobile worker program coordinator to work with ITA to provide the floor plans, employee location, and function data, and current mobile device assignments. I apologize for such a lengthy introduction, and I'm available for any questions you have on this topic.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, I'll go ahead and open it up to you for any questions you might. I'm sure we have quite a few questions.
Bob might have more than I do, but I have some questions.
So you start.
Thank you. First of all, Mr. Ross, thank you for being so chivalrous to our chair. You're a true gentleman.
Technology topics are touchy matters.
Right? You know, it's all personal. No, so a couple of questions. Is there a priority list in terms of the rollout for the departments, et cetera, in order of importance?
That's a great question, and actually I failed to mention my name and title, Ted Ross, General Manager of the Information Technology Agency. So, I said everything but that, apparently. That's a great question. One thing that we identified as we were working towards this is that really the nature of this program is by location as opposed to even by department. So we need to ensure that we have the right coverage. We need to work with the workers in that physical facility as we implement it. So there are certainly some departments who do encompass 1 or 2 major facilities, but there's certainly others that spread across it. So what we identified was a combination of both large and small buildings. We like large because it allows us to tackle a lot more employees, and we can do great coverage and ensure that we roll it out in that space. It's great for implementation. But we also like small because there's already great coverage at many of those, as well as there's certain locations where they're requesting a new phone installation. It would make sense to do that instead of installing the old while we're doing it. Right now, on the top of the list is to complete and finish City Hall East, Piper Tech, Marvin Browdy, all 3 of which already have coverage. We're in the process of City Hall South of building out the coverage, and we have another 400 plus buildings behind that. So we have a nice, very comprehensive long list. But the nature of it is tackling the types of buildings where we can capture both a lot of staff as well as ensure just the proper coverage to roll out.
Because all of our field operations also have to roll that out. And so is that included in your 400 plus
Yes,
list?
it is.
All the field.
You bet. Council field offices are included in our 400.
Sure. So how about how does LAFD, LAPD, what is the relationship there? How prepared do you feel they are? And excuse me, what are the consequences for first responders in general in migrating to this new system?
Early on, one thing we have to note, and it adds a little complexity to it, primarily it's a focus on civilian employees. Mm-hmm. We've toured, so for example, I remember very clearly last year, we toured with LAPD Van Nuys Station. We toured it because it had a jail, it had a whole sorts of operations there. And one thing that was very clear was unless we were going to do a major business process reengineering, the nature of a station is they receive calls and transfer calls constantly. They also work 24 hours. So at any given desk, they're working it with multiple different staff. So the use of VoIP desk phones for the majority of an LAPD station was very clearly how they had to operate. So that's something of how we'd be implementing at LAPD. We're identifying some of the same when it comes to LAFD. When it comes to the civilian workforce, it's a very different nature, the vast majority of which have dedicated desk. The nature of the work that they're doing is radically different. So
the desk phones stay for
primarily for an LAPD
incoming
station.
calls for fire and police.
There were some items. With undercover narcotics, vice, a set of others who much preferred a smartphone, and they're going to be getting that. Mm-hmm. But as a general rule, the nature of how those stations occur today, they're going to be getting primarily voice over IP.
And that's not in conflict with the FCC change at all?
No. So what will happen is we have to get off of POTS lines, and it looks almost identical to a VoIP line. And I think that's one of those important aspects. It won't have any issues with FCC.
Got it.
But the switch from this to this is actually much more expensive than the switch from this to this. Not just for implementation, but even on an ongoing basis. So while an LAPD station does require, based on the nature of how they use it, voice over IP desk phones, the majority of office workers would actually much more benefit from getting this device.
Mm-hmm. And one of the realities in terms of phone lines in case of an emergency, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of people left their landline in place just as an emergency. I'm going to pause for a second. He walks in and interrupts the meeting immediately, and that's Herman.
Mr. Herman.
Yeah, so interruption number 1 already. In terms of the capability of retaining a landline for emergency purposes, in case there's some sort of catastrophe that shuts everything down,
Yes.
what are the implications for that in relation to this transition?
It's a traditional approach that I've ascribed to. However, there's one thing worth noting. A traditional POTS line doesn't require a power supply, right? And so you could plug it right into a phone jack and leverage it, and you'd have that at home. By 2020, that's the very system that won't be available. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is the city doesn't purely use a traditional POTS line. We run through PBXs. So in the case of a disaster, our PBXs likely would go down. We've been actually having issues with our aging PBXs. That's why we're full-fledged in the LAPD replacement. We'll have rainstorms and other types of things that actually eliminate it. So what we've identified through, let's say, Superstorm Sandy and others, 2/3 of cellular coverage was available where traditional phone lines were not.
Okay.
So what we're actually finding is that from a voice communication perspective, cellular is actually becoming more rugged than voice over IP, which requires power, right? So power goes out, voice over IP is down. It also requires network, which requires a variety of other facets. This is actually more rugged from what we're seeing in the last 3 to 5 years. And in addition to that, the POTS option even eliminates in 2020 anyway. So it's a nuanced answer, and I appreciate it, but I completely understand because I always had the mindset, keep your traditional landline so that you can have it in case of an outage. But times are changing. The vast majority of businesses have been on voice over IP for 10 plus years.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Littlefield?
Thank you. So does the approval of the ITA recommendations mean that the mobile worker program will be implemented citywide without additional consideration of options? Is that the step we're taking, or are there some additional places along the way where that will be finalized?
I think our intent is to, if funded, continue forward, balancing voice over IP with smartphone as we work with various departments. As we just had the conversation, LAPD will be heavy in the VoIP desk phone conversation versus the smartphone conversation. However, at ITA, 80+% were on the smartphone versus desk phone. So we work very closely with departments, but I think our overall approach is because there's such a powerful organizational benefit as well as a cost benefit to the smartphone, we're generally looking for departments to have to rationalize or justify a VoIP desk phone. It's all too easy to try to keep what you have. Even though it'll cost more, it's harder to maintain, and it replaces function like for like as opposed to get beneficial. I don't know if that answers your question.
It's sort of, maybe this may be more of a procedural thing on our end in terms of when we get to that place where there's no turning back. And I think it's a good program, so this isn't because I want us to turn back. I'm just trying to understand where we are in the process, and this is kind of a pivotal moment.
I think generally speaking, the ITA under charter is responsible for technology, and our ability to replace one type of device with another type of device is one that we would leverage under charter. But I think it's fully appropriate to come to council to discuss the pilot program, to discuss the merits, and to really seek how maybe council would like us to proceed in that regards. We don't want to.
And we'll have to get through this in budget because part of the problem was last year you asked for more and we weren't able to get you as much as we wanted for the VoIP and
Correct.
Everything else, and so
we're trying to approach it with full disclosure. So we're make sure you're very clear on the pilot, the direction that we've identified. We're open for all sorts of feedback and input. But I think very much based on all the input we're seeing and subject to the funding side of it, we think it really is the right approach for the city. I maybe failed to mention, but ITA for 6+ months has already been without desk phones for the majority of our users, except for admin staff and our call center. And so I haven't had a desk phone for 8 or 9 months. And it's a change, but it's not a really big change when it's all said and done.
that sort of leads me, how has the feedback been? Has there been any negative feedback? Is it all positive?
As a general manager, people don't always give me the truth. So I'm going to ask Laura, right? I'm known as sir in the elevator, and sometimes they'll tell me what I'd like to hear. So I use Laura very much as a barometer, Laura Ito from ITA, to get the skinny on really how it happened.
Good afternoon. My staff and I were the guinea pigs. We were the first group to move to mobile devices exclusively, and we did so back in May. And we really initially had some issues with getting the adequate phone coverage, but we worked well with T-Mobile. They were very responsive to our comments, and when we when we told them that the coverage wasn't working throughout the building, they came in and fully augmented the 4 floors that ITA is on, and so now we have excellent reception. There's no problem with phone coverage. No calls dropping, no static.
And they did those signal boosters for free, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's part of the, I think I heard you say this, but I wanted to clarify it. That's part of the contract.
Yes.
So
That's
if
their
they get a
proposal,
particularly
yes.
difficult building that's made out of, concrete and marble,
Yes.
that they're gonna be
their commitment.
responsible for.
So if you can imagine for $15 per line per month, unlimited call, unlimited data, unlimited text, and it includes a phone replacement every 2 years, and it includes in-building augmentation.
And we get to decide if it's fully, supported. If they come in and say, well, there's sort of a line.
We leverage meters to ensure there's the right kind of coverage.
Right. Our own staff that are communication electricians do testing on the signal augmentation.
Correct. Great. And how is this compared to other cities? Are we ahead of the curve in this, or have other cities handled the transition from the POTS?
I've had various conversations with other cities as well as in private sector. Private sector has certainly been an area that's been leading the way on this. So certainly the Googles and the Amazon and others have all sorts of locations which they've made that migration. For various cities, we're a little late to the party, but that means, to use the party analogy, we know how everyone's dressed, so we can show up really looking really good. So, because most cities already moved over to voice over IP, so they made substantial investment in voice over IP. They spent the millions to make that migration, so they're not eager to make that replacement until they need to do a refresh. So probably in the next 3 to 5 years, you'll see a mass shift over because of the investments they've already made. Because we made our investments in the early 2000s, from 2000 to 2006 or so, we actually have not made that, so we're actually leaping to a next level and we're moving into cellular. So for large cities, no, they haven't. We would be the first for a large city to do it. For some smaller cities, yes, they have. And for private sector, yes, they have.
And how many POTS phones have been converted to VoIP, and how many mobile worker phones are in use?
On the mobile worker side, we just did the pilot, so around 464. For POTS to VoIP, a little bit of a complicated answer because we have some areas like the Public Works building where they have a legacy VoIP system which has been giving them issues. It's not our current vendor. It was implemented maybe 8 to 10 years ago. I'm looking to Laura to confirm.
I thought it was, about that.
Yeah, about that. So it's a little bit complicated, but there's around 30,000 aging lines, which includes legacy voice over IP, and the vast majority of those are POTS lines, of the 30,000.
And the for Fig Plaza after the Da Vinci fire, we turned all those into VoIP, is that right?
Yes.
VoIP. Yep, that was one of our opportunities to try it out and to learn on it. So that but with the implementation of smartphones and the implementation of VoIP, we were able to get very familiar with it. The other aspect, though, is insurance allowed us to augment a lot of the cost, subsidize a lot of the cost associated with voice over IP there.
Right. So I guess they would be, now they're at the back of the line for conversion to the mobile worker program because they have an up and running VoIP system.
Correct.
Great, thank you.
Great. Thank you. I have my own questions. And as someone who has also maintained a landline because I just have a hard time breaking away from it at home, this is going to be a very unique transition, I think, and it's really forward-thinking. In terms of the cost savings you mentioned per line as a result of the implementation, what are the cost savings that are currently incurred, given just the differences between the mobile device and the voice over IP?
So it's a great question. Sometimes we get asked the question of, well, these old lines must be really expensive, therefore we're going to save a lot of money. And for some of our lines, that's true. For many of our lines, because we made multi-million-dollar investments in early 2000, our current costs really aren't as much. We're spending around $4 million across 30,000 lines for the plain old telephone. It's actually cheap. It's actually around $11 per line. The replacement is going to be expensive regardless of the direction we go. So a voice over IP, we could look at a $16 to $17 range per line per month, not discussing implementation costs. And for these smartphones, it's around $13 and some change plus $2 a month to get you every 2 years a replacement. Voice over IP, do you remember offhand the cost?
$500 for the implementation, so that's $250 for the device and about $250 for the rollout, which is the configuration of the phones and the delivery.
Correct. And one thing we do, it gets to have a lot of certain items to it. One thing also that's very important is we have to build out our network to support voice over IP, whereas on a cellular side, it's leveraging
You
the
can
vendor's
activate it
network.
quicker. So given that, I mean, we're looking at a projected significant investment
Yes.
for, in terms of budget.
Yes.
So given, you've had, I know there's a request for $100,000 in funding, what's going to be the long-term implications of what we're actually talking about?
So we received 100,000 for this last year.
Right.
We made the ask for, was it 700?
700.
700,000 for this upcoming fiscal
Okay.
year. Not because it's enough to get us there, it's
Right.
because the city can only take so much at one time. Keep in mind that for the last 3 years, we've been asking for funding for this project because we knew 2020 was coming down the pipeline. Laura, what would be the remainder, if funded at 700,000, if you've got the spreadsheet in front of you, I have a mobile worker right next to me here, what would be the remaining amount required to fund it at 700,000?
It would be around another 500 for the one-time costs.
This is dramatically cheaper from the $10 to $20 million range of the voice over IP implementation across the city.
Now, I know my office is supposed to pilot this, as well as a couple of other council offices that have signed up. What is the timeline of some of these other offices rolling out? I know we haven't rolled out ours yet, so.
We wanted to talk to you in committee first to
Okay.
make sure that because like I said, we've been doing the pilot side. I'm not sure, Laura, if we've already gone through and done the site visits to ensure they've got the proper coverage, because that's always the first step. That's where Laura's team had that issue initially.
Got it.
Just shoving a little, what looks like a toaster in the corner is not proper coverage. So we make sure they have proper coverage.
Right. We've met with a number of council offices to discuss the program and find out where you would be like us to start out with our rollout. So we haven't done the augmentation tests at every facility, at all of your field offices, but we're working with your staff to determine what's the best, where you would like to start, us to start.
Coverage first, then what we do is we get involved with the porting of the numbers. We deliver this to you, already has some preset applications and everything ready to go. We give a period of time in which you have both, and then we go ahead and disconnect one, move the number on over. So like I said, we've worked through like a 5-step plan to ensure that.
So how does that interact for those of us that are already assigned some city mobiles? Does it just get fed into the existing? How does that work?
So the way we've approached it is primarily from even like a cost-cutting perspective. And that's a really great question. For the average city department, if let's say they have 1,000 people and 50 of them have city-issued cell phone numbers, our plan is to get off of these traditional desk phones, so we would target giving them 950 to replace that. The intent is to allow them to continue using their 50 and to remove the phone line. Part of the intent of that is to simply keep the cost down. So for a department that's already funding for their cellular phones, then we would be able to try to address just the remaining desk phones to do the work. For elected officials and others, we're looking at some different approaches to be able to support that, because we're not looking at, you end up with a higher percentage of people who have city-issued phones, so you're uniquely different, and B, we're still working with the elected officials to ensure the nature of the office and everything's balanced right. So, for example, you have relatively small offices in which multiple people are covering phones. It's different from, let's say, my office. So you may end up with a few extra voice over IP phones or a different solution. We really approach it from a solution-by-solution perspective. We have enough experience where we feel like we'll know what the answer is, but we want to make sure we work with departments because the intent is to make sure when it's all said and done, that phones ring and people still answer them.
Right. Councilmember O'Farrell and I were just having the conversation as well about the ability to transfer, because that's really the functionality that I think most of our offices are typically utilizing the landlines for.
Correct.
And so how does that functionality, how does that work with the mobile cell service?
For staff whose primary job is to receive and transfer, they'll no doubt have voice over IP. We're actually receiving products and reviewing products that allow smartphones to do the very same function. So there's certain capabilities that are being implemented and being provided that we're reviewing to deliver that.
So calls can be transferred to a mobile device from a VoIP phone. So if you have one person who's your receptionist, they can have a VoIP phone and then transfer the calls to the rest of your staff who are on mobile devices.
So then likely we would have probably a voice over IP at City Hall and our field offices, and then amongst the staff have a number of smartphones issued to the balance of
Right.
the staff.
That's generally the balance. Mhm.
Okay.
And if I may, Madam Chair, so we could just still exist with just one city-issued phone that way?
Yes.
Yeah. Perfect.
Oh, see, you're good. I have.
Well, I have a personal one as well. but I mean,
Because I don't,
yeah.
like, I'm
Yes.
carrying two phones
Yeah.
around. And so in terms of, you said, what was the number so far that has actually rolled out?
464.
464?
We,
Okay.
we still have a substantial amount of our original pilot money remaining, so we're getting ready to continue the rollout. So that's just about, yes, that's all of ITA, and that's also a team of folks in Mayor's Office of Budget and Innovation in City Hall.
Okay. I'm trying to think what
We were hesitant to work too aggressively without reporting back to the committee on this topic.
Yeah, well, in terms of some of the employee relations rules and things like that, I know that's kind of a sensitive
Yes.
conversation in terms of people's utilization of their smartphones after hours, if they're, depending on whether or not they're exempt employees.
Yes.
What are the conversations around those protocols with, as it relates to the city attorney's office and what the employee relations board and everything?
Another excellent question. The reality is we're not just changing phone technologies, but we're changing capabilities, right?
And
I'll-
workflow. And,
Yes,
yeah.
I'll never forget a question asked to me by an employee, because our traditional view for us digital immigrants, our traditional viewpoint is a desk phone. We always have the desk phone, and it's there, and it receives these calls, and this is a cell phone that augments
Mr. Herman,
that.
please don't interrupt.
A cell phone is something that augments it. Although in our world, while that's still my mindset, we're in a world now where over half of households don't even have a landline at home anymore. That was as of 2017. I know. I'm with you. I'm in the, 45% or so who still does. Although I have been increasingly asking myself the question of why. The family doesn't check the answering machine messages. It's just me. And so I can go on, and I won't. But the reality is we are increasingly in that world where we see the cell phone differently. However, various generations have already made that shift. So to address that, we've been having the discussions with CLA, CAO, employee relations, personnel. When we did the rollout inside of ITA, we worked with our labor unions to discuss that before we did the implementation. And that was important so that we could start to kind of walk through everything. Take, for example, Public Records Act. We walked through in great detail for an hour what information is stored on a device, what's not stored on a device, what would CPRA look like. Generally speaking, the answers were very satisfied for city attorneys, CLA, and others. We also had the discussions around employee relations. So, for example, today we have anytime, anywhere access to Gmail through mail.lacity.org. So a lot of the same policies and a lot of the same practices that we leverage for that would be leveraged for this. The end result is a refined technology use policy. So today we have an acceptable use policy, but it's really just for desktops. This is a technology use policy because in concept, you now have a phone that's also a computer. And what it is it's 2 pages, easy to read, 1 page back and forth, written in plain English that clearly identifies, and this is the policy being reviewed by city attorney, employee relations, et cetera. It really does, it very clearly states how this phone should be used, the employee responsibilities related to that phone, and of course very clearly states non-exempt employees and hourly employees, what their rights and their responsibilities are when it comes to after-hour use, et cetera. I was asked by an employee, it says, now that I've got a replacement of a smartphone with a desk phone, am I expected to answer the phone on the bathroom? To which I said, do you take your desk phone to the bathroom? I hope you don't. Just because the device can move doesn't mean it radically changes the nature of how you do that. An employee can literally leave their device on their desk or in their drawer. That's it. It doesn't change the nature of it. And I think that's what it creates that puzzling question for people. Just because you can do something doesn't mean the city's asking you to do it. And that makes it even more important that our policies are clear and straightforward.
So how far down the line are we in terms of vetting that policy to assure that it's kind of already concrete and it's been vetted and approved by all the different parties?
They've already reviewed and approved.
Right. We're waiting for the final approval from the city attorney, and then we're also meeting with the unions just as a to show them the policy so they're aware of the project.
Okay, so that part is still, we don't have final on it yet.
We do not have final from city attorney. However, we're leveraging the same language that they finalized for Gmail. So we're waiting on the final from city attorney, but we've already got a lot of initial feedback saying that everything looks good, but I won't speak for them. And so we do not, I'll be very clear, we do not have the final authorization from city attorney.
Okay. I would like to see a report back on that, just to make sure that we're kind of all on the same page in terms of the implementation and what that's going to look like.
Yes.
And colleagues, I don't know if, were there any other questions?
One follow-up. Thank you. You talk about the phone. How hard is it to get, and I don't think it's that hard, to get two lines on your phone? So if you had your sort of desk line, and then you also have, which maybe employees give out more freely, and then they have a separate work line for when they're out in the field, could be on the same device so that they want to stop the general calls at a certain hour, but they still have access if they need to, have a personal call after a different line, different ring, or.
It absolutely can be added to the device, but it is an additional cost. That's our hesitation on it. So certainly some, and I'm talking to elected officials, certainly there could be some very compelling reasons in your use case. But for the average ITA employee, that's not something we would do, simply because the cost would start to add up.
Have we looked at the utilization of maybe Google Voice, since many of us already have the Gmail, and whether or not that might be the option to actually solve that particular problem that you're talking about?
We have familiarity, but we haven't yet worked really closely with the department who's made that request. So we know it's going to come down the pipeline when it comes to elected officials, but we have no issues in identifying with Google Voice is the right way to approach it. There's items provided through cellular carriers. There's apps one could use as well as Google Voice. So you may very well be right. It might be the best solution, but
Well, only because it allows us, we can create another line, another phone line based on our registered Gmail account.
Yes.
So it
And we're
might be
Gmail shop.
it might be the better way to do it, and there's no cost associated with that. I am a frequent user.
No, and that way employees who have a desk phone that they want to use during certain hours but want to be able to shut off at a certain time will still
Right.
have access.
I just think
we're
it's
hiring. Would you like to work for ITA? You've got it. I think you've got it.
now that
You're hired.
now that I solved the problem, now that
That's
it's
right.
done,
Yep.
next problem.
Yes.
No, but I
An excellent suggestion.
well, happy to oblige. No, I think it's, again, I'm already carrying two. I carry my personal and my city phone, and I know Google Voice is, it's already a service that is available to us for those of us that utilize Gmail.
Correct.
And so why not opt in for registering with those numbers? I think just to the point of how our staffs all work within the community, whether we're using this and maintaining the assigned number as our landline, and then however we want to be reached after hours through a Google Voice, that might be the best way of managing it, or vice versa, just so that we could shut off the times in which we actually receive calls on the phone.
We'll have to establish internal protocols, right? So if you're technically at your desk and you get a call transferred to you, you're going to want to pick up. But if you're at a meeting or out in the field, then that sort of line should be in place.
Different
so that you're not
ringtones,
necessarily
different ways, so you're very
Right.
familiar which call you're getting from
right.
what line.
A cell phone call, the way we get them now out in the field, is one thing.
Yep.
But you don't then want to be transferred to from your desk line if you're out in the field.
If you're ever out of a job, the three of you, just please look me up, because this is the right team I want.
The one other, just to throw a little something at it too, is, because I know it transcribes the messages
Yes.
and whether or not,
For voicemails and things.
right, what the implications are, I think, for CPRA and all those others. I think that's part of the regular protocols that you would
Sure.
review.
Yes, it was. One of the items that we went through is that voicemails are typically held by the carrier for about 30 days. So if a CPR request came in within the 30 days and it was relevant to that, then that is an item that they could provide. After 30 days, they get deleted, unless one takes extra steps to try to hold, and then they can be kept for another 30 days. So that was one of the items that we went through in very clear detail with the regarding CPRA. So texts, voicemails, et cetera. It was a fun conversation for an hour with everyone going through all the different items.
There is so much one can learn when one is a digital immigrant, like myself.
You and me both.
Did you have another
Nope,
question?
good.
Okay, so I'd like to go ahead and recommend approval of recommendation number 1, and I know we requested a report back on the employee relations portion.
Yes.
So we will
So we'll
approve
provide
the continuance of the mobile worker pilot for other city departments at various locations until all funds are expended.
We'll provide a report back to your suggestion when the technology use policy is approved, so we'll come back with that conversation.
That'd be terrific. Any objections?
Nope.
No
So
objections.
ordered. Thank you very much. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. We do have a speaker card.
Well, you've already had multiple open.
Oh, we had multi,
You closed,
okay.
yeah.
So we already opened and closed multiple public comment cards? Oh, so wait, do we have, so we take item,
Since we haven't fully
Okay.
acted, we can let,
so,
speak to the one item.
okay.
Did he submit multiple items, or did he submit an item for each, a card for each
Yeah.
item?
Yes.
When in his multiple, did he list all the items? Did he list item number one? For every item, I think you should allow him to speak, because they haven't acted on the item. They've acted on 4, 5, and 6, and 3. So 1 and 2, he can speak for a minute on each.
Okay, so, okay, so we're going to go ahead and take, so we didn't take a formal action yet.
Not yet, and I had a question on that. Since there are 4 recommendations, your motion was to approve recommendation number 1?
Correct.
With respect to the recommendations 2 through 4?
So to continue the mobile worker pilot for
That was
others.
recommendation number 1.
Right. And then I wanted to instruct ITA for a written report as it relates to Personnel Department, CAO, Employee Relations, to report back
On the policy?
on the policy. Also, my apologies, I wanted to also request the steps needed to implement the MWP citywide, including the timeline for implementation.
So you want to report back
I
on
want to
that?
report back on that.
And then with respect to the access agreements, that was recommendation number 2.
Correct.
You want to
Report back.
report back? Okay. All right, so.
Okay. Thank you, and we'll go ahead and take Mr. Herman. Thank you so much, Ted. Thank you. both.
Thank you.
Mr. Herman?
It's item 1, correct?
Yes. So we're on multiple, right, so we're doing 1 and 2? Item 1.
Item 1.
Item 1.
So how do we establish a protocol for mobile device? Well, first of all, any device belonging to the city of Los Angeles belongs to the taxpayers, the ratepayers. And since there was no community impact statement, none submitted, I'm asking that you shelf this item number 1 until there is community impact statement in regards to how much we, the taxpayers, the legislative body, decides to pay for these additional phones for you to take home and carry. Because many times that information on there is important, and the FBI and anyone who wishes to investigate the protocol under the so-called amendments you're demanding will be given exclusively rights to the FBI to see whether or not Herman Jason Wesson is making threats verbally and on phones belonging to the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Herman. So with that, going back to the item as, right, the recommendations will be adopted as noted. Okay, thank you very much. And colleagues, as it relates to item number 2, I know there's some information that I'd like to dig deeper on, and so I'd like to recommend a continuance until the next meeting. Without objection? So ordered? Okay. And have we cleared the desk?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This meeting is adjourned.